Mail-in voting, often called absentee voting, occurs when a voter receives a ballot from their state government, and then the voter fills it out and mails it back in. The U.S. first used postal voting during the American Civil War to allow Union troops to vote while still away from home fighting the war. Today, 5 states hold elections entirely by mail. It is still the primary means for U.S. military service members and Americans living overseas to vote during election time. But in election year 2020, voting by mail has become a national controversy. This is Vote by Mail, Election Controversy in the Time of the Coronavirus.
The 2020 presidential primary election took place right in the middle of the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic across the United States.
Safety precautions required social distancing as well as continually sanitizing polling places. This all made in-person voting hazardous. Long lines at polling places and general fears about spreading the coronavirus led to at least 16 states to postpone their primaries or expand vote-by-mail systems. People may vote by mail to avoid long lines on election day, but many people vote by mail in advance of the election because they can't take time off from work on election day, and this is especially true for low-income workers. Under the U.S. Constitution, each state determines for itself how elections will be held in the state. The Elections Clause in Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution states that the state legislatures shall determine the times, places, and manner of congressional elections. And the Electors Clause in Article 2 says that the state legislatures shall determine how the state's electors in the Electoral College are chosen. Note what is essential in each of these clauses is that it is the legislature in each state that determines how elections are done in the state. All 50 states allow some kind of mail-in voting. As of today, 5 states, Colorado, Hawaii, Oregon, Utah, and Washington, have voting that is virtually all vote by mail. Most states require that mailed-in ballots be received by Election Day if they are postmarked on or before Election Day. These are the states that require mailed-in ballots to be received by Election Day. That means when you mail it, you have to make sure it's going to get there by Election Day. It's a lot of information here on your screen. Maybe you see your state here, but to look up your state specifically, go to vote.org. You can find out how to register to vote in your state. You can find out if you're registered to vote, and you can also find out what the rules are in your state for vote by mail. 2 states require ballots to be received before Election Day. That's Louisiana and Mississippi. President Donald Trump has argued that mail-in ballots would increase voter fraud. In multiple tweets, he has claimed, without evidence, that the Democratic Party would rig the election against him. And in fact, he said this in public appearances as well.
The Democrats are also trying to rig the election by sending out tens of millions of mail-in ballots.
In July 2020, the president even proposed delaying the date of the election because of his concerns over voter fraud. But Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution clearly states that only Congress has the power to change the date of the election. And in August 2020, the president did not approve $25 billion in emergency funds to the U.S. Post Office because, as he said, quote, that means you can't have universal mail-in voting, unquote. But voter fraud is rare. After the 2016 presidential primary election, the largest investigation in a state into voter fraud was in the state of Tennessee. And in that state, officials found 42 credible allegations of voter fraud out of 4.3 million total votes.
The number was so low, it would not have affected the election's outcome. Once in office, President Trump created a commission to investigate election fraud. He had claimed that millions of undocumented immigrants voted illegally. By January 2018, however, the commission had found no evidence of widespread election fraud, and the president shut down the commission. While always rare, voter fraud occurs more often with mail-in ballots. Richard L. Hassan, a professor of law and political science at the University of California, Irvine School of Law, says that election fraud occurs more frequently with postal voting, quote, but it is still rare, unquote. In fact, Professor Hassan has cited a study that shows that there were fewer than 500 prosecutions in 12 years of elections in recent history. Polls of those who plan to vote by mail do, in fact, show that 76% prefer Joe Biden in the upcoming presidential election, compared to only 20% who prefer Donald Trump. But a recent study showed postal voting tends to affect turnout, how many voters show up, for both major parties equally, and vote by mail does not increase the share of total votes for either party. Vote by mail does, however, increase voter turnout overall for both parties. Because of the easy spread of the coronavirus, many states have been encouraging voters to vote by mail by enacting policies in which all active voters in the state will receive a vote by mail ballot. When mail is undeliverable to someone, or when the state government gets information from a government agency that a person has actually moved from their home location, then that voter would be considered inactive and would not receive a ballot. That's the law in California, and generally is the law about inactive voters in other states. California Governor Gavin Newsom, a Democrat, issued an executive order in May 2020 ordering that all of California's registered voters get vote-by-mail ballots for the November 3rd, 2020 general election. The purpose was to encourage, but not mandate, postal voting in the election. The California Republican Party and the Republican National Committee sued the state of California in May 2020 to stop Governor Newsom's vote-by-mail executive order. They called Newsom's order a, quote, brazen power grab, unquote, in their complaint, in which Newsom attempted to single-handedly rewrite election law. They alleged violations of the Elections Clause and the Electors Clause of the Constitution. It is the legislature, they argued, that should pass a law for mail-in ballots to be sent out, not the governor. A month after Newsom issued the order, however, the California legislature passed a law authorizing Newsom to issue the vote-by-mail ballots. The Republicans' lawsuit became moot, or no longer relevant. The state of Nevada then passed its own bill that will provide mail-in ballots for every voter in the state. But the new law also requires election officials to count ballots that are received up to 7 days after Election Day, if postmarked by Election Day, and up to 3 days after Election Day, even if the postmark is not clear. And a postmark is that stamp that goes on an envelope to show what day something was dropped in the mail. The Trump campaign, the Nevada Republican Party, and the RNC sued Nevada's Secretary of State, also a Republican, to stop her from issuing the mail-in ballots leading up to the November general election. They argue that the new Nevada law's counting procedure will mean some ballots could be mailed after Election Day. Federal law states that the, quote, electors of president and vice president shall be appointed in each state on the Tuesday after the first Monday in November, unquote. That's why the first Tuesday in November is Election Day. In their complaint, they say that the Nevada law, quote, effectively extends the congressionally established Election Day, unquote. Other states have expanded their vote-by-mail procedures leading up to the November 3rd election. States like Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin have all expanded their vote-by-mail procedures and have all been challenged in ongoing lawsuits by Republicans, whether the Republican National Committee or the Donald Trump re-election campaign. In response, some states like Arizona have agreed to do voter education initiatives to try to get more voters to return their ballots on time by Election Day.
As partisan as the vote by mail issue has become in the 2020 election cycle, some Republicans do support postal voting. U.S. Senate Majority Whip John Thune expressed his support for vote by mail, and House Representative Liz Cheney criticized President Donald Trump for proposing to delay the election. She said that opposition in the Republican Party to that idea was deep. President Trump himself voted by mail in the Florida primary election.